A legacy of conquest. Spain's African empire. Spain started showing up in Africa way back in the 1400s looking for riches and power. Early Spanish explorers, wanting gold and new lands, set up small settlements along the African coast. These little bases, often just fortified trading posts, were stepping stones for taking over more land. The Spanish conquistadors, tough soldiers who had fought in the Americas, had better weapons and were determined to control the local people. The way Spain ran its colonies, taking resources, spreading their religion and playing political games, changed Africa forever. The winds of change, setting the stage for decline. By the 1800s, things were changing in Africa. The powerful Spanish Empire, weakened by problems at home and competition from other European countries, started to struggle. New ideas about nations and freedom, sparked by thinkers and the French Revolution, spread to Spain's colonies. The Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s hit Spain's plans for colonies hard. All these things, a weaker Spain, new ideas about nations, people fighting back, and a struggling economy, meant Spain's African empire was about to shrink. The Canary Islands, a harbinger of change. The Canary Islands, near Morocco, weren't part of Africa, but they showed the problems Spain would have. Spain took over these islands in the 1400s. They were a useful base and provided food. But in the 1800s, people there started to resist Spanish rule. Locals, angry about Spain's control and how it used their resources, wanted more freedom. The fight for freedom in the Canary Islands, though it didn't lead to full independence then, showed the trouble Spain would have keeping its African colonies. The Spanish-Moroccan War's seeds of discontent. In Africa, Morocco gave Spain a much bigger challenge. The Spanish-Moroccan Wars, which went on for years in the late 1800s and early 1900s, showed that Spain's army wasn't invincible. These wars made people unhappy, which eventually led to Spain losing its North African lands. Morocco, a country with a long history of freedom and a strong identity, fought hard against Spain. Moroccans, united by their Muslim faith and wanting to stay free, fought a long guerrilla war against the Spanish. These wars were long and expensive for Spain. Shifting sands, the loss of IFNI and the rise of anti-colonial sentiment. When Spain lost IFNI, a small coastal area, to Morocco in 1969, it was a big moment. People in Morocco, inspired by other African countries getting their freedom, fought harder to get IFNI back. Attacks on Spanish soldiers increased, forcing Spain to rethink things. With pressure from inside and outside the country, Spain gave IFNI to Morocco in 1969. Losing IFNI showed the world was changing, colonies were becoming free, and it was getting harder and more expensive for countries like Spain to keep them. The Green March, ceding to pressure in Western Sahara. Losing Western Sahara in 1975 was a big blow to Spain's shrinking African empire. It showed how much pressure European countries were under to give up their colonies. Things came to a head in 1975 when Morocco's King Hassan II organized the Green March. Lots of Moroccans marched into Western Sahara to show it belonged to Morocco. The Green March, a clever political move, put huge pressure on Spain, which was already dealing with problems after the death of General Franco. Spain, facing a possible war with Morocco and criticism from other countries, decided to make a deal. The Madrid Agreement, signed in November 1975, split Western Sahara between Morocco and Mauritania, ending Spain's rule there. Echoes of Empire, the legacy of Spanish Guinea. After losing other African territories, Spain focused on Equatorial Guinea, a small country with a mainland part, Rio Muni, and an island, Bioko. Unlike other Spanish colonies, lots of Spanish people moved to Equatorial Guinea, and they tried to make it more Spanish. Spanish language and Catholicism became common, and some Guineans got a Spanish education, creating a complicated social structure. Equatorial Guinea's economy, based on cocoa and coffee, mostly helped Spanish plantation owners and businesses. Forced labor and taking land away from locals caused anger, setting the stage for trouble. A new dawn, the rise of nationalist movements. In the 1960s, many African countries wanted freedom, including Equatorial Guinea. Inspired by other successful independence movements, Guinean nationalists started organizing and demanding freedom from Spain. These groups, though initially divided by region and ethnicity, united against colonialism and wanted to rule themselves. Francisco Macias Nguema, a compelling but controversial leader from the Fang ethnic group, became important during this time. These nationalist movements, driven by anger against colonialism, economic problems, and a desire for self-rule, set the stage for Equatorial Guinea's difficult path to independence. The last outpost, Equatorial Guinea, on the path to independence. By the late 1960s, Spain, under pressure from other countries and its own people, knew it couldn't keep its last African colony. The United Nations told Spain to give Equatorial Guinea its freedom. In 1968, because of this pressure and unrest in the colony, Spain agreed to a vote on independence. On the 11th of August 1968, most Guineans voted for independence. Talks between Spain and Guinean leaders led to an independence agreement in Madrid on the 12th of October 1968. Countdown to freedom. The independence referendum of 1968. 1968 was a big year for Equatorial Guinea. After centuries of Spanish rule, they had a chance to decide their own future. The world, especially the United Nations, was pressuring Spain to let its last African colony go. Inside Equatorial Guinea, the nationalist movement, though divided, was strong. Different nationalist groups, all wanting independence, campaigned hard, getting people excited about the vote. Spain, seeing that independence was coming, agreed to the vote. This referendum on the 11th of August 1968 gave the people of Equatorial Guinea a huge choice: stay under Spanish rule or become independent. The campaign wasn't always peaceful. The nationalist movement, while united in wanting independence, had different groups competing for power. The Spanish authorities, while saying they wanted a fair vote, were also accused of trying to control the result. The rise and reign of Macias Nguema from hope to tyranny. The referendum result was clear. Most Guineans voted for independence, wanting to be their own country. Celebrations showed how much people wanted freedom. On the 12th of October 1968, Equatorial Guinea officially became independent. Francisco Macias Nguema, a leader from the Fang group, became the first president. At first, people were hopeful. Macias Nguema promised unity, progress, and good times for everyone. But this quickly turned dark. Macias Nguema, once seen as a hero, took all the power, got rid of democracy, and became a cruel dictator. He used ethnic differences to make his own Fang group more powerful. Anyone who disagreed with him was jailed, tortured, or killed. Newspapers were silenced, and no one could speak freely. Equatorial Guinea, once a symbol of hope, became a place of fear. A nation in the shadows, isolation and repression. Under Macias Nguema's terrifying rule, Equatorial Guinea became isolated. The economy, which produced cocoa and coffee, collapsed because of bad management, corruption, and skilled workers leaving. Schools closed and teachers were persecuted, destroying the education system. Healthcare disappeared and people had to look after themselves. Macias Nguema's paranoia was extreme. He made himself president for life, banned political parties, and terrorized his people. Intellectuals, professionals, and anyone he saw as a threat were targeted. Prisons were full of political prisoners who were often tortured and killed without trial. The world, at first hesitant to get involved, started to notice the horrors happening in Equatorial Guinea. Reports from human rights groups and a few brave journalists showed a country trapped by a cruel leader. The coup of 1979. A new era dawns. By the late 1970s, the world saw Equatorial Guinea as a bad place, ignored by other countries. The economy was ruined, people were terrified, and the country was falling apart. In August 1979, soldiers led by Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Macias Nguema's nephew and former prison boss, overthrew the dictator. Macias Nguema was captured, quickly tried, and executed. People were cautiously optimistic about the coup. Obiang promised to fix things, rebuild the country, and bring democracy and human rights. Other countries, wanting the terror to end, offered some support, but Matthias Nguema's cruelty left a lasting impact. Equatorial Guinea faced huge problems: a destroyed economy, traumatized people, and a political system damaged by years of repression. Would Obiang really change things, or just be another dictator? The 1979 coup that removed Francisco Matthias Nguema brought cautious relief to Equatorial Guinea and the world. The decade of terror was over, but its impact remained. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, who overthrew his uncle, took over a broken country. Its economy was shattered, its people hurt, and its systems destroyed. Obiang promised a fresh start. He said he'd bring order, rebuild the economy, and bring democracy and human rights. Political prisoners were freed, exiles could come home, and a new constitution promised a multi-party system and fair elections. The world, wanting stability and democracy, offered aid and investment. Equatorial Guinea, once isolated, was accepted again, and there was hope for a better future. But the change was harder than expected. Matthias Nguema's cruelty was still felt. The country's political culture, based on fear, wasn't ready for democracy. Obiang, despite his promises, took more power, silenced dissent, and didn't want to give up control. Finding lots of oil off Equatorial Guinea's coast in the early 1990s changed everything, in good ways and bad. The oil money made Equatorial Guinea, once one of Africa's poorest countries, one of its richest, at least on paper. The economy boomed and Equatorial Guinea became a major oil producer. Obiang's government built roads, bridges, airports, and fancy government buildings showing off the new wealth. But the oil boom also made problems worse. The sudden wealth led to massive corruption. Obiang and his close friends became very rich, while most people stayed poor. Equatorial Guinea became an example of the resource curse, where countries with lots of natural resources often have corruption, inequality, and dictators. The oil, instead of being good, became a curse, making the rich richer, the poor poorer, and giving the rulers more power. The world, at first impressed by the economic growth, started criticizing the government's human rights record and lack of transparency. Human rights groups reported widespread corruption, unlawful arrests, torture, and limits on freedom of speech. Today, Equatorial Guinea is a country of contrasts. It has great wealth and terrible poverty, modern cities and rural villages, promises of a good future, and the reality of ongoing repression. Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, after over 40 years in power, is one of the world's longest ruling leaders. He's held on to power, crushed opposition, and kept his family in control of the oil money. The oil, while bringing wealth, has also made Equatorial Guinea dependent on one thing: vulnerable to changes in oil prices. Recent lower oil prices have shown the country's weak economy and the need for change. Equatorial Guinea faces many challenges: corruption, lack of transparency, weak rule of law, and human rights abuses. The world keeps asking for reforms, wanting the government to fix these problems and share the oil wealth with everyone. Equatorial Guinea's future is uncertain. It could be a successful country using its oil money to create a fair society. But this needs a big change in government, transparency, accountability, and respect for human rights. Spain's loss of African colonies isn't just about an empire shrinking, it's about changing world power and growing nationalist movements. Spain's colonies lasted centuries, greatly impacting Africa. Decline was sped up by Spain's problems and African resistance. Losing Morocco, Western Sahara, and IFNI showed a changing world. New African nations were born, but independence wasn't easy. Equatorial Guinea shows the difficulties post-colonialism. Independence hope was crushed by Matthias Nguema's rule. Colonialism's impact is still felt. Colonial borders and systems still affect Africa today. Equatorial Guinea's story isn't finished. The country is at a crossroads, dealing with the legacy of colonialism, the challenges of oil wealth, and the fight for real independence. Freedom that's not just political, but also economic, social, and cultural. The oil, while bringing wealth to a few, has also made inequality worse. fueled corruption and created new problems. Equatorial Guinea's future depends on escaping the resource curse, diversifying its economy and sharing the wealth with everyone. The world can help Equatorial Guinea build a better future by providing aid, investing in education and healthcare, and pushing for good government. This can create an environment where all Equatorial Guineans can succeed. The people of Equatorial Guinea, like those of other former colonies, control their own destiny. Their story is one of resilience, overcoming hardship, and wanting a better future. The challenge now is to use that spirit to build a nation that respects its past, while looking forward to a brighter tomorrow. A tomorrow where the damage of colonialism is healed and true independence is achieved. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like and share. Leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. For more historical insights, check out our other videos on the channel.